Hello, and welcome to the program. This is the Black Ponder. I'm your host, Neil Trotter, and today we're going to be talking about some political philosophy, particularly socialism and communism, even. And we're going to do that via an exploration or a deep dive. I guess a deep dive, or maybe just a dive into this work by Che Guevara, right? And it's called Socialism and Man in Cuba, right? And there's actually a book, a published book, probably several, but I just printed it on the internet where it's free. Books can be expensive, so I try to save money when I can. Print it on the free. Gotta do it legally though. Don't steal books. I'm just saying that so I don't get in trouble. You know what I'm saying? Do you? But I'm just saying. But this is a printed copy. I do that all the time. I print copies of stuff when I can. Now, Socialism and Man in Cuba by Che Guevara. So Che, right? Very famous revolutionary, like one of the most famous revolutionaries in modern history, right? Strong proponent of communism, part of the Cuban Revolution. Him and Fidel Castro pushed that the Cuban Revolution. He also traveled extensively throughout South America, pushing socialism and communism. Even went to Africa to push communism and go against the establishment, the capitalist establishment, through guerrilla warfare style tactics. Ultimately, he was killed for his guerrilla warfare, trying to go against the establishment. But he's got this long legacy, as most people are somewhat familiar with the man. On top of his guerrilla warfare style tactics of pushing socialism, he was also very intelligent, and he did a lot of work, a lot of academic work too. And so I'm just reading a group of, I guess, notes that he put together as more of a letter to address to the people, the masses. His people, the people who are for socialism. And, it's just words of encouragement. Socialism and Man in Cuba is what it's called. And I would just like to read you some quotes that I found in that text that I thought was interesting, that we could talk about. And that's what we do here at the Black Ponder. We read quotes from philosophical texts. Is this a philosophical text? Absolutely it is. Political philosophy, but philosophy nonetheless. Okay, so let's see here. Trying to see how I can give you a reference here if you want to follow along, like a page citation, because it's a printed copy, and I'm sure there's like plenty of editions, both printed and digital. So where do I start? So this is so this here is the section. It starts invisible laws of capitalism. Okay, let me read you this. In capitalist society, individuals are controlled by a pitiless law, usually beyond their comprehension. The alienated human specimen is tied to society as a whole by an invisible umbilical cord, the law of value. So let's go into that Marxism, surplus value. This law acts upon all aspects of one's life, shaping its course and destiny. The laws of capitalism, which are blind and are invisible to ordinary people, act upon the individual without he or she being aware of it. One sees only the vastness of a seemingly infinite horizon ahead. Right, and so that's quite an insight there. I would even take it further and even just beyond capitalism. Like, let's just say, like, people adopt ideologies and they don't really think about how those ideologies or, ways of being really influence them. They don't really think about the influence. They kind of just go through the motions. And definitely capitalism works off of that actuality. It really survives off that actuality. People just assume, capitalism is delivering great things. And they're not looking at like, well, it's also doing all these harmful things, right? And it does those harmful things in this invisible, hidden way. We're talking about the exploitation of people to create capital, goods, and commodities. So that's part of it. But, you know, I wrote in here in my notes, right? The inhumanity of value associated with what you produce, right? So you become valuable based off of what you can produce. So you become a machine of capital production rather than an agent of human relation, right? So, you know, where do we find happiness and value, really true value in life? Really, it's from the relationships we develop between each other, right? But capitalism in its full force, I guess you would call it late stage capitalism or whatever, hyper capitalism, value is just seen as, okay, what can you produce? You know, what commodities can you create? You know, what is your productivity, right? And so what it really means to be a human, like the true value of the human is just pushed aside. It's like, you know, it's ignored. Like, who cares about your relationships with who you're connected to, who you're involved to? It's about like what you can produce, your productivity. That's all that matters, right? Because ultimately it's about capital generation within the system of capitalism, right? And that's where you come to the inhumanity of it, right? Where it's the human nature of like building relationships gets pushed aside. And now you're just basing the value of your life on the commodities and the capital that you create. And this evaluation becomes what you base your humanity off of. And so what happens is burnout, depression, mental illness. You know, you really lose what it means to be a human, and you don't even realize, like, why am I depressed? Like, why am I anxious all the time? Why am I overworked constantly? And it's because you're associating your value with what you can produce, which is like this never-ending cycle of just capital generation. And you know, it's not, you don't even realize that it's happening. It's like your misguided interpretation of value, the Marxist concept of surplus value, that's the focus, and you don't even realize that that's a misguided focus. And in that way, the engine of capitalism is invisible, like, right? Because you're not even realizing it. But let me continue here. That is how it is painted by capitalist propagandists who purport to draw a lesson from the example of Rockefeller. We all know Rockefeller, the tycoon, you know, one of the first, you know, super elite, rich, multi-million-dollar businessmen of America, you know, made his fortune off of capitalism, you know, that kind of person. But we got Rockefeller, right? Whether or not it is true about the possibilities of individual success. The amount of poverty and suffering required for a Rockefeller to emerge, okay, and the amount of depravity entailed in the accumulation of fortune of such magnitude are left out of the picture. And it is not always possible for the popular forces to expose this clearly, right? And it's that actuality that's exposed by people who say, like, how does a billionaire exist? Like, the only way a billionaire can exist is if lots of people are exploited, right? Like, there's lots of people who exchange their labor for an unequal exchange rate. They're not getting the full worth of their labor. And that exploitation, that uneven value exchange is extreme. That's the only way like a billionaire can exist, right? If the person that became a billionaire because of the products or the services they offered, but you know, those products and services are also a result of many other people working their asses off and putting in their labor to make it happen, right? If those people got their fair share, right, the billionaire would be a billionaire because the billionaire would have to like pay their fair share to the laborers that made his idea, his concept of the service or the product into actuality, right? This is something we don't really want to talk about. You bring that up and people are like, hey, I'll bring all that up, you know, or they'll do some mental gymnastics and try to explain away that actuality. But that's really what's going on, right? There's a huge amount of exploitation that is required to advance capitalism. So now I go to this section that's called New Consciousness. I'll read you this quote. It says, retaining effectiveness, however, requires the development of a consciousness in which there is a new scale of values. So effectiveness of what? Right? The effectiveness of pushing socialism or, communism, right, is what Che was pushing for ultimately. How is this push effective? Well, it is that you have to develop consciousness where there is a new scale of values, where values aren't associated with what you can produce. Rather, values are associated with other things that are actually aligned with what it means to be a human being rather than just a machine of capital generation. So there needs to be a shift of what makes a human being valuable. How is a human being valuable, right? What does it even mean to be a human being, right? Those kinds of shift in mind, that shifts in consciousness even, that's what needs to happen for socialism to become a dominant socio-economic system, right? And then he says, society as a whole must be converted into a gigantic school, right? So, yeah, and what I like about that is we're starting to get into the philosophy of socioeconomics and humanity and politics. There needs to be an awareness, a new awareness in society. And society as a whole must become a whole school where we're teaching each other, okay, where are we really placing value, right? Is where we're placing value actually making most people happy, right? Why is it that most people aren't happy, right? Which is kind of the world we live in today, right? What's going on here, right? And these are philosophical questions. Let me continue reading here. In rough outline, this phenomena is similar to the process by which capitalist consciousness was formed in its initial period, okay? So how is capitalism pushed, right? They kind of do the same thing, like in a different way though. So it's the same thing, just expressed differently. Let me read. Capitalism uses force, but it also educates people in the system. Direct propaganda is carried out by those entrusted with explaining the inevitability of class society, either through some theory of divine origin or a mechanical theory of natural law. This lulls the masses since they see themselves as being oppressed by an evil against which it is impossible to struggle. Okay, yeah, we're talking about the myth of capitalism, like the American dream, right? What you want is your husband and your wife and your 2.5 kids and your white picket fence and your dog and your cat. And did I mention the house? Yeah, you want your fish. You want your goldfish in the fish bowl, and then you want your large yard, right? Your green yard, and you want to mow it every week. And that's the American dream. That's supposed to provide us happiness, right? That kind of thing. Well, and then you can keep going with this, the whole idea of capitalism. Like, the world is a zero-sum game. There's winners and there's losers. And somebody's got to lose for somebody else to win. So what are you going to be? Are you going to be the winner or are you going to be a loser? Because there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser, right? That's just how it works. That's the natural law of things, right? And this is propaganda. we buy into this. We're like, yeah, I guess I just gotta buy into this system because this is just how nature works, and this is just the human animal. This is how human beings operate. It's like, no, this is what we've been programmed. We've been conditioned to believe by, people who already have a lot of money and a lot of power, and they want to perpetuate their money and power status. So they're like, let's let everybody else think this is the way things should be so we can keep staying at the top, right? So capitalism pushes that a consciousness too. There was a previous video I did where I talked about the capitalist imaginary, right? It's all a frame of thinking, right? Once we break out of that frame of thinking, we can say, oh, you know what? Maybe capital in and of itself is a concept that's made up, right? And we kind of know this, right? But we don't want to like delve deep into it because we're not conditioned to delve deep and think deeply about these things. We're just like, we kind of just brush it off. It's like, that's just natural law or even some sort of divine reality. That's just how it is. But is it though? But here we go. I'll continue reading. Next comes hope of improvement, and in this, capitalism differed from the earlier caste systems, okay, which offered no way out. For some people, the principle of the caste system will remain in effect. The reward for the obedient is to be transported after death to some fabulous other world, where, according to the old beliefs, good people are rewarded. For other people, there is this innovation, okay? Class divisions are determined by fate, but individuals can rise out of their class through work, initiative, etc. The process and the myth of the self-made man has to be profoundly hypocritical. It is a self-serving demonstration that a lie is the truth. That's a core insight, I think, right? Because you have these old laws of divine origin where it's like, you're just born this way, or, there's a God that says you are this and that's just who you are. So you're a good person and you're a bad person, right? That was the old ways of thinking, based off of old mythology. To be quite honest with you, many people still buy into that type of like manifest destiny, even like fundamentalist Christian points of views that think like that, There are just some people who are just born to be saved and some that are just not, right? That whole Calvinist type of thinking. But capitalism provides a way out of that, where it's like, well, if you work your ass off, if you work really hard for the system, then you can rise above it, right? You can like work your way into the elitist class, Hard work will do it, right? But you gotta work for some corporation or like for some institution, and that way you work really hard, then you can get into the elite class, and then you can even start saying like, well, I'm part of this elite class now because I worked really hard, and those people who aren't part of the elite class, they just didn't work as hard, right? So they have no excuse. They were born a certain way, but hey, I was born a certain way too, but I worked really hard for the system and I got my way out, so I deserve to be here and they don't, right? And so that's what he's talking about. He's talking about that, this false reality that's created. The problem is this false reality, not only does it lead to the suffering, first of all, it's false, right? It's just made up. Secondly, it's immoral because you're just disregarding other people based off of some abstract concept of value. And, third of all, it doesn't make anybody really happy. Right? Those people who are like, yeah, I worked really hard. There's, those people still aren't happy. They're just like constantly grinding at the wheels. Meanwhile, like mental health goes down the hole, right? Nobody's happy, right? Depression, anxiety, even among the social elite, right? The economic elite, even a lot of those people aren't happy because we're all associating our worth and our value off of a system that's only designed to just generate capital, right? And it's not designed to actually provide happiness for human beings, right? Because it doesn't address any human need. It only addresses the need of capital. And so in that way, we're getting more Marxist, right? In the Marxist philosophy, but it's true. And I'll read you this quote. This is the third paragraph of this section called New Impulse for Artistic Experimentation. Okay. So it says, so Che writes, socialism is young and has its mistakes. That's some powerful insight right there. It's like, hey, we're working through this thing called socialism. It's not perfect, but it's still a better alternative than capitalism, right? That's, Che's point of view. And he writes, "We revolutionaries often lack the knowledge and intellectual audacity needed to make the task of developing the new man and woman with methods different from the conventional ones. Conventional methods suffer from the influences of the society that created them." Once again, the theme of the relationship between form and content is posed. Disorientation is widespread and the problems of material construction absorb us. There are no artists of great authority who also have great revolutionary authority. The members of the party must take this task in hand and seek the achievement of the main goal, to educate the people. I love it. The main goal to educate the people, right? And he even says himself, like, socialism is young, we're making mistakes, but so we're educating ourselves. Not only are we the teachers, we're also the students. We're learning together. And the reason why we're making mistakes all the time is that we're falling back to the old conventional methods, right? The lies of capitalism and the capitalist imaginary, picking yourself up by your bootstraps, which makes no sense whatsoever. Self-made man, that mythos. Life is a zero-sum game, that myth. The myth of man as the breadwinner and woman as the homemaker. All this stuff that's based off of capitalism. We're constantly falling back to those old methodologies, which are conventional, because we've been conditioned since birth to adopt these things, and we're making mistakes constantly. But that's where we have to educate ourselves, and we have to grow and raise our consciousness, and that's the only way. And we have to do this as a whole, as a society, right? Society becomes an enormous school, right? And he said to himself, the main goal, the main task of the party, the Communist Party, is to educate the people, right? That's amazing. So it's, philosophy, right? Delving into the philosophical nature of what it means to be human, the philosophical nature of consciousness, the philosophical conception of value. What makes a human being value? What makes a human being valuable? How is value actually expressed in a way that actualizes real humanity? Right? I mean, these are philosophical questions, and Che was pushing for this. And that was it. That was all the highlights that I had here, I think. Yeah, that was it. I just wanted to share that with y'all and just rep some more political philosophy, which I feel the field of philosophy neglects because, as I've said multiple times in several videos, lots of people who are into philosophy think politics are a bastardization of philosophy or a dumbing down of philosophy, right? Which is really short-sighted, because politics has this huge impact on our way of life. And if we don't address that impact, that influence, using philosophy, using the tool that's this tool that's so powerful, then really what is the point of philosophy, right? Not saying other fields are not as important, epistemology, ethics, phenomenology, existentialism, all those different fields, transcendentalism, you could go on and on about that. And those are very important parts too, but political philosophy, particularly nowadays, right? But, all the time, really, it's very powerful, right? And it's very important. So I just wanted to talk about that. But feel free to comment below of your, opinions and your philosophical insights. And contribute to the supplementary commentary. I'd love to see it. And in any case, you've been watching The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.